Wait a minute, you never told me this would be recorded. No, I'm kidding.
Uh-oh. I see people starting to join in. We got quickly, actually. This is great. All right, hello everybody. We're going to give people a few minutes to join in. If you would like to, please hop into the chat, the webinar chat, and let us know who you are and where you're joining in from. And we'll get going in maybe 2 minutes. Okay, working on the chat is disabled comment. Thanks, everybody. It's okay. Do I know? I mean, do you know how to turn that on?
Yes.
Okay, we've been enabled. Thanks very much, Katie. All right. Yes, thank you. Not a Zoom expert over here. Okay, we'll give everybody just a few more minutes. Thanks for letting me know that that chat had that issue. We'll also be using that Q&A panel as well. So we got Dawn from Princeton, Massachusetts, Andy from Clarksburg, hello from Chicago, Phoenix, Boston, Ashburn, Virginia, Taiwan, Ottawa, Verona, New Jersey, Virginia, Europe, Hungary, Denver, New York City. Everybody's coming from everywhere. This is great. We've got a Joe McNally in Bucharest. That's a coincidence. Lakewood, Colorado, New Zealand, Troy. Well, thanks. This is great. Thanks for letting us know where you're tuning in from. We'll get started in. Let's just get started now. This is really cool to see everybody. So greetings and welcome everybody. This webinar is being recorded and you'll receive an email shortly after the webinar with a link to the recording. My name is Ted Waitt and I'm Associate Publisher here at Rocky Nook. And I have had the distinct pleasure and honor of working with Joe as his editor on a few books, including his latest book, The Real Deal, which is what we'll be talking about today. This webinar is a fairly free-flowing conversation about Joe's work and his latest book right here. And it's also, Joe's going to speak for a bit, and then we're going to have an open Q&A. So if you have a question for Joe, I really would encourage you not to put it in the chat, but put it in the Q&A section of the webinar. And for whatever time we have, we'll tackle any questions we can find and bring up. We've got a few questions from a form that was sent out in the registration link before the webinar. So we've got a few questions ready to go, and that's that. So let's get started. I'll introduce Joe, and then he'll take it over. So Joe McNally, as probably everyone here knows, is an internationally acclaimed photographer whose prolific career includes assignments in nearly 70 countries. He's known throughout the world for both his technically excellent photography and his charming demeanor, confidence, and of course his humor. He is among the rare breed of photographers who's bridged the worlds between photojournalism and advertising, amassing an impressive commercial and advertising client list. He shot numerous cover stories and highly complex features for National Geographic, Life, Sports Illustrated, and of course many more magazines. McNally is a master of lighting and is known for his large-scale production work, in addition to his vast storytelling experience. His wide range of commercial and assignment work is regularly cited in social media and surveys as a source of inspiration and industry leadership. He's won dozens of awards over the years, including the first Alfred Eisenstadt Award for Journalistic Impact for life coverage titled The Panorama of War. He is a proud Nikon ambassador. And finally, books. His books include Faces of Ground Zero, The Moment It Clicks, The Hot Shoe Diaries, The Life Guide to Digital Photography, Sketching Light, and his latest book, The Real Deal, Field Notes from the Life of a Working Photographer. With that, I will welcome you, Joe, and let's take a look at you.
There we go. How's it going, everybody? Technology is working. It seems like I'm up on the screen.
Technology is working. Thank you. And you look like you're not at home. Where are you? Are you
not at home?
A working photographer?
Yeah, it's the life you lead. Last week, blessedly, wonderfully, I got a last-minute call from a production house I'm very close with and I've worked with for a number of years, and dear friends associated with that production house here in Bucharest, Romania. And I said, we have a last-minute corporate job and we'd like you to come over and shoot it for us. We have a complex arrangement with a client that owns many factories. And so we're going to do a barnstorming tour of these factories and try to come up with some interesting graphical pictures and pictures that get us across the client's mission and all of that. And so I re-geared my schedule and flew to Bucharest on Sunday overnight and got here yesterday. So I am in a hotel room in downtown Bucharest, and I have to say it's one of my favorite places to be. Romania is a wonderful, magical country. I've always received a warm welcome here, and I still am astonished by the variety of landscape, of the urban architecture, of the variety of people and places and things that populate, a relatively small country. I mean, it's not huge, but the variety of things here is, for a photographer, is absolutely wonderful to encounter. So yes, I am not home. That was a lengthy answer to a very simple question, Ted. I apologize.
No, that's welcome. It's nice to, it reflects the nature of the book in so many ways, right? You think you're going to be one place, you're somewhere else very quickly.
Yes, I mean, I've said this many times. A long time ago, a friend of mine in this industry looked at me and said, if you're going to do this well, you have to make friends with uncertainty. You have to be comfortable with uncertainty. And that is a hallmark of a photographic career. You come in, you go to quote unquote work on a day, whether you have a studio or, home office or whatever, you get a call from a client and your schedule, your world can turn 360 degrees in a heartbeat. So you have to go where pictures are, you have to go where work is. And that's kind of been what I've been doing for about 40 years.
Yeah, remarkable. And you talk a lot about that in the book. Do you want to take over here and show us a few pictures and then maybe talk about the book a little bit?
Sure, happy to. So let me just share my screen. and do that and this. So you should be seeing a picture of a lady with a cow in her kitchen. Is that the case,
Looking
Ted?
good. Looking good. Yep. Looks like an
So,
imagination to me.
So yeah, so I just popped this up there because I shot this the last time I was here in Romania, and or one of the visits. I've been here, I think, about 4 or 5 times, and it actually became the title of a chapter in the book called "Your Imagination is the Cow in the Kitchen." And then the next line I wrote to lead off that story was that, and it won't go away. And that is kind of the hallmark of a photographer's imagination, or your yearning, your yen to shoot pictures, to seek the world out with the camera in your hands. You're always driving forward to your next photograph. You're always curious about what uh, is around the corner, literally, and physically, as I explained in the phrase, you'll basically stay here and do that, or you'll finish your work until the cows come home. And I never thought of it. As a kid, I was like, it just means I have to sit here and finish my homework. And all these years later, I actually visited a small village in Romania where the cows actually do come home. Now, for some folks, they might say, duh, of course this happens. For me, it was a revelation. I mean, I saw these cows, heard the bell, and they came out of the fields, and they literally, I don't know, 100 or more of them just walked down the main street of this small village, found their driveway, walked up their driveway, and went home with no guidance, no mandate, nobody telling them where to go, or anything like that. They just knew where home was. And yeah, when you think about it, yeah, okay, they've been doing it a long time. They've been coming home. And I thought, that's fantastic. I somehow have to come across with a picture that bridges the experience I'm having now with the experience of my childhood. And so I went with my translator, who sort of like looked at me and slack-jawed, wonder. And I said, could you find a family that'd be willing to have the cow come into the house? I'm not a farmer. I'm a city kid. I don't know anything about cows, but thankfully it was a very gracious farming family. And they said, okay, all right. So I lit the kitchen, got the kitchen all set. You need to do that when a very large animal like a cow is about to make an entrance. And then they knew how to do it. It was a mama cow and a baby cow, and they brought the baby inside the kitchen. The baby is off to camera right. You don't see the baby, but naturally, mom poked her head in the door to see what was happening with her child. And I told the grandmother there at the table to just continue to have breakfast as if nothing's happening. And then she doubled down on that and gave me a look that was definitely worth the trip. And as I say in that story, would this have been easier if I had bypassed it, if I had neglected it, if I just said, nah, that's just too crazy, and it's also going to be a lot of work? Just don't do it. I mean, it's like the tree that fell in the forest, man. Nobody's going to know that I never did it. But the imagination of a photographer is it's like a yapping dog that just won't leave you alone. And you can't ignore it ultimately, because it obviously has more energy than you have, and will just keep after you until you enact something, and just take a stab at what you're thinking or dreaming about. And so that's kind of what this particular chapter is about in the book. And the whole book is a little bit like that. It's an anecdotal account of the life of a photographer. Is there learning in there? Absolutely. But it's presented, couched, if you will, in story form. It has some history, some background, if you will, when I started, all of that, the difficulties encountered in New York, cracking the ice somehow getting a foot in the door and keeping it there. As I always say, when you have your foot in the door, it really starts to hurt after a while. And that was certainly the case in New York. New York is a very powerful teacher as well as a humbling influence on literally anyone who has a brain. Because you look around and you think, oh, you know, the hubris of being a young photographic student, I was just like, New York is waiting for me. No, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't. So it was a bit of a hard go at first. And let me just make an adjustment in my screen here. I'll put the actual book up here. Let's see how we do. And so the real deal, field notes from the life of a working photographer. What I say in the very beginning in the frontispiece is I imagined a life and then I took pictures of it. We have that blessing, right, as photographers. And I won't go on over much here because I want to, get to some questions and hopefully be helpful in my responses. But the photographic life is you're constructing, if you will, an overlarge family album of your time and place on Earth, and you have skills, accelerated skills, to really illustrate that album. It's not just, you don't go through life with a bunch of snaps on an iPhone, as wonderful as that is. You actually are sent to places because of the interest level of a story or an event or a development or a trend, and you are asked to photograph that. And that series of photographs becomes yet another chapter in who you are and where you've been. As Ted indicated, I've been to a lot of countries. I've crossed a lot of boundaries, some of which were perhaps ill-advised. That's also part of the photographic life. But I did go to New York in a quixotic moment of idiocy. You could label it as hubris, some measure of, I don't know, wayward determination. I wanted to be a photographer in the big city. That was something I just wanted to do, needed to do. And so the opening chapter is a leap of faith. And this opening spread is a picture I shot in 1977 with a Nikon EL. And it was an 85 millimeter lens. And that is the south corner of 72nd Street and Broadway, just across from the 72nd Street subway stop, which always flooded in the rain. And this young lad is leaping over it. And I made this picture, and it working at the Daily News, you were always charged with, and I was not a photographer, let me make that clear. I was not on the photo staff. I was trying to get pictures in the paper as a copy boy, as a studio apprentice. So I would shoot things like this, hoping to get what they would call a feature. The paper called it a rope, ROP, a run of paper. Something about the weather, something about, it's early spring and the flowers are beautiful. But, so I kind of go through, the cat picture down here was actually a front page, believe it or not. Dead bodies on the subway. I started my career, which at that point, that was a very grand description of what I was trying to do. I was trying to scrape out a living. I was trying to make it day to day. It was nothing elevated about the process. It was pretty scrappy. And so I would go to Studio 54 at night. That's Diane von Furstenberg with Halston, and do flash on camera party pictures and sell them to the UPI for $50. The subways were a very important part of my life in the early going of New York, and shooting black and white. And New York back in the day, that's Brooke Shields. I made that picture at Cafe Regine at the flash on camera Kodachrome. Probably don't need to know this, right?
It's good to know. It's good to
know. I shot at Kodachrome 64, which was stupid because I'm inside this dim interior of Cafe Regine, which was on Park Avenue and very famous night spot. And Brooke was so attuned to photography. She had been in front of the camera her whole life. She actually looked at me after I shot this picture, and the shutter was probably ISO 64. I'm going to figure this was probably about 1/8 of a second. And she heard the shutter and she looked at me and goes, "Oh, wow, long shutter." And I just kind of smiled back. I was sort of dumbfounded that she actually could establish the length of a shutter speed with a camera. She was so familiar to the idea of being photographed. She's a lovely young lady. And, but then, things started to crack loose. I'm not going to go through the whole book, please. People are probably dropping off of this chat thinking, oh my God, is he going to go through every goddamn picture in the book, for Christ's sake? This is like going to your neighbors when they're showing you their vacation pictures. So yeah, no, I won't do that. But the opening chapter, there's another rope, if you will, that was a front page, heavy duty blizzard conditions on 7th Avenue in New York. My very first dance picture started very simply, black and white picture of a friend who was practicing at Lincoln Center. And 40 years later, I'm still shooting dance. And ironically, as a kid, these are the full circles or partial circles that you inhabit as a photographer. I photographed her at Lincoln Center Dance Studios. Easier back then, didn't have to show ID and all that, make arrangements. I just wandered in there with her and I started photographing her. And many years later, I had 50-foot by 30-foot posters, banners dropped at the very same building, Lincoln Center, because I shot the advertising campaign for American Ballet Theater. So it started as a very small, humble kind of favor for a friend, ended up becoming a piece of my archive, a substantial piece. There's Studio 54 again, handheld, crazy exposure. Prince Paul, which is a story I got into the Daily News. And that's the opening chapter of the book, just kind of like, how do you get started? How does this happen? As if there's a science or logic to it, which there is not really. I always tell people I've made a career out of seemingly doing the next best thing that presented itself, which for folks who might have an arc or a plan for their life and career probably sounds, ridiculous, or perhaps even dangerous, like, not being familiar or aware with where your next paycheck is coming from for many years. Okay. I mean, and I'm very honest about that. I've sold lenses to pay the mortgage. But for all these years, there's been nothing between me and the poorhouse except the camera I'm holding in my hands. And that's still the case. So that's the account that is presented in this book. And I titled it very specifically in long collaborations with Ted, like, and these are questions that could be sent to Ted, actually. I was probably 40%, into the writing of this book, and we were still having a conversation about, like, what the hell is this book anyway? Mm-hmm. Ted was like, this is not fitting. This is not a square peg in a square hole. This is something else altogether. And we struggled with it. And we finally kind of landed on a title like this because it is written in a real way. It's written unflinchingly, I guess I would say. And it's also very carefully chosen in terms of the wording, the life of a working photographer, because there are many, many degrees of being a professional nowadays, from folks who shoot on the weekends, a little extra income, folks who are excellent, who maybe shoot for a hobby, et cetera. And for me, for all of this time, this has been work. It's been wonderful work. I don't label it as work because it's in my blood, but it's what I do for a job. So the title of working photographer was chosen very carefully. So bounce it over to you, Ted. I mean, you know me, I'm pretty chatty. I could just keep rolling here, but are there any questions or any initial thoughts that are coming your way via the chat room?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions, and then I do have a few that were prepared as well. And also just to, I'm sure you might expect this, but everyone in the chat is saying, of course, we're happy to hear stories as long as you're willing to tell them, and do whatever you want. And so we're happy to hear them. And
all right.
But one question I could ask, there's one question in the chat that, speaking of working photographer, this is a little bit, it's particular to the actual work. How do you deal with scope creep? This is Joe from Berkeley. How do you deal with scope creep after a negotiation on what will be provided for the price? Clients typically ask for more, a lot more. Normally, the folks who negotiated the agreement are not the folks who are asking for more. How do you deal with that as a working photographer, those dynamics?
Thank you for explaining that, because I was really fishing in my head for exactly what scope creep meant.
Scope creep, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting term. And it's very valid, because as photographers, we don't have, I don't know why, but we don't have like the advantage of being, I don't know, a plumber or an electrician. When you show up and they've given you a price on fixing the sink, and you ask them to fix something else, well, that's another price. Photographers, we don't seem to have that beauty and benefit. It's like, oh, while you're here, has anybody ever heard that with the camera and your lights and this and that? Oh, while you're here, would you mind shooting, a group shot of all 24 people in our office? Hello? It, doesn't say that in the job prospectus. We do try to very absolutely and completely define what scope of work is. And we have a document called scope of work, and we try to itemize that and be as definitive as possible. The photographer will do such and such. The client is responsible for such and such. The client will supply talent. The client will supply and fund a studio or an appropriate space for the photographer to be working in, et cetera, et cetera. We also try to put parameters as best as we can onto the amount of time one logs during the course of a day. And things that go beyond that time are subject to additional funding. But it is a challenge. I don't disagree with you. I don't know if anybody online has ever shot a catalog. I've done a number of them over time, and they are difficult days because everybody wants to get, the extra large blue golf shirt with the piping on the collar. Where is that? Oh my God, we have to shoot that, and 15 setups, 16 setups, 18 setups. I mean, just garment after garment after garment. And by the end of the day, you're ready to run screaming from the studio. Well, I try to be pleasantly strong. I always describe I have a wonderful, wonderful advantage, if you will. And that's in the form of an amazing human being, Lynn Del Mastro, who has been our studio manager for 32 years. And she knows the business backwards and forwards. And she is one of the most thorough, logical people you'll ever meet. So she really does her best to put a client in a box. Okay, we are agreeing to do this, and this is what we are sharing as a document. And this is, the game plan, if you will, and we're going to stick to the game plan. Doesn't always work, but we try to make it work.
Excellent. So that's how you handle it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't throw tantrums on the set. I'll be honest about this. If someone asks me to do something additional for them, my sense of grace and timing generally just says, swallow hard and smile pleasantly and say, sure, that would be fine. Because at the end of the day, and there's actually a chapter in the book about this, and I call it the house always wins. Because if you throw a tantrum, if you get difficult, if you ask so much as a question, you'll be considered difficult, and they'll find someone else to shoot with the next time. And I have a chapter in the book. The title of the chapter is When Hubris Meets Stupid. And it's an account of how I got really, really pissy about a situation with nonetheless grand a magazine as Time magazine at the height of its powers. And I went to battle. I was like, this just isn't fair. I'm going to stand my ground. This is just, and, I mean, I just didn't work for Time again. That was the upshot of it, And so, yeah, the house always wins. understand that going in. Pick your battles incredibly wisely. Pick battles that you can win with good grace and good sense. Don't be, a flaming artiste. Don't use bad language. Don't go off the cuff. Don't get irate, especially on the set, because when you're on the set, everybody takes their cue from you. And when you go down, everybody goes down. If you get morose or grumpy, people know it. People feel it. Your subject will feel it. So yeah, part of this business is to be a bit of a self-psychologist and just kind of stay calm in your headspace and know that your mission there is to shoot pictures, and all the other crap that you have to go through is essentially, I don't know, irrelevant to that main mission, to a degree anyway. You're the one, and I'm going on again too long here, but at the end of the day, will they remember the situation was incredibly difficult? Will they remember there was a lightning storm and the power went out? Will they remember any of that? No, they won't. They'll just be in a conference room and they'll be looking at the pictures, and if the pictures aren't any good or up to their satisfaction, you're to blame. Nice, huh? Fun.
Yeah, no, this is cheery. This is great. No, what I keep hearing, and what I feel like is throughout the book, is through your own experiences. You've distilled so many lessons that have applied to you in that particular time, but moving forward 40 years. A lot of these are a lot of the instruction, if you will, and advice in the book is relevant for, it's universal. And it applies to today's working photographer as well, even though these are lessons you might have learned 35 years ago. And to that end, I have a question that one kind of collection of questions that we had collected kind of could be gathered under, how are things different these days? And so one of the questions was from David in the UK, and he says, you talk a lot about the freedom and thrill of being a young photographer in New York City in the 70s. I love your anecdote about climbing the Queensboro Bridge. Do you think you would get the same excitement from photography if you were starting out as a young shooter today? And so there's how might you take yourself into the world today if 1976 were 2022? And then you might fold that question into, what advice do you give a young photographer starting out these days?
Well, first of all, it's a very perceptive question. And it wraps itself around a lot of, life's phenomena, that occurs. Like, would I opt to go back to my teens? I mean, everybody's like, oh, the aging process, it's a terrible thing. Oh my God, everything, blah, blah, blah. Would I go back to my teenage years? And the answer is a resounding no, I would not. And that actually, has a kinship with the question you're asking. If I was starting now as a photographer, would I be as excited as I was when I hit New York in the 70s? And I'd like to think the answer is yes, I would, because everybody's sense of who they are and where they are living in terms of historical arc here is different. So the opportunities that the web presents to photographers, the technology that we have to present to a young photographer to be a storyteller for video or with video, audio, podcasts, ways of expressing yourself that have multiplied tenfold since my time as hitting the streets of New York with black and white film in my cameras and hoping the newspaper would run one of them. Sitting by the phone in my early career with magazines, hoping the phone would ring, and really not having the opportunity to quote unquote get published unless that magazine sort of waved the blessing upon me and assigned me to a job and then actually published that job. I've shot many jobs especially in the news weeklies, were very guilty of this, if you want to call it that, because they were such high wire acts. The Time and Newsweek were in fierce competition with each other. Time was always the bigger brother. They always had more money and more resources. Newsweek was the scrappy, magazine crosstown. And they would close on Friday night, very late on Friday night, sometimes even into Saturday morning, because they had to hit the streets on the following Monday. And so week to week, it was high wire time. In fact, the top editors at Newsweek magazine used to call themselves the Walendas. And so if you went up for a meeting with the top brass, you were going up to see the Walendas. And that was a reference to the tightrope that they were on, their jobs on the line literally every week. So they would assign routinely for a single issue, they would assign 6, 7, 8 photographers to go out and shoot covers of different subjects. And there's only one cover. So a lot of that stuff just would go away, and never be published. So magazines were the portal, and reflecting on the kind of digital superhighway that we were all currently, rolling on, that portal to have your work seen was very, very small, but it was very vibrant, right? In the world with a camera, things were more freewheeling. I bought a ticket to Northern Ireland, just impromptu, when the hunger strikers and the Troubles were really at a fever pitch. And I was on the Falls Road in Belfast the night Bobby Sands died in the H blocks. And my agent had called Newsweek, and Newsweek gave me $1,000, a guarantee. That meant that they had first looked at my pictures. And then my agent got a European guarantee from Bunte magazine, big magazine in Germany at the time, another $1,000. All of a sudden, I'm a kid and I'm covering international news, and I got $2,000 in my pocket. And like, holy smoke, this is amazing. And then ABC called me because I had been working for ABC. And they said they had moved the anchor, which was a very big deal for the network. They had moved Peter Jennings from London to Belfast. And they said, find Jennings, shoot a picture of him. And that was the beginning of a relationship with Peter Jennings. Again, I'm going on too long here, Ted, but
this is great.
And Peter and I, we weren't friends, but I photographed Peter numerous times. He was a hell of a good newsman and a decent soul. And the first thing he said to me when I showed up, panting like I finally found him, I need to shoot this picture, And so he just looked at me, he had his trench coat, and he looked at me and he goes, so what they really want, Joe, is the trench coated anchor man on the streets of the war-torn city. Am I about right? And I'm like, yes, you are, sir. You are exactly right. Mm-hmm. And so I made that picture. And then ABC reached out to me when the North calmed down and said, when you go back to London, go to the ABC studios and photograph Jennings. And I walked in to photograph Jennings at the ABC studios, and the wires started clacking. Back in the day, there was a thing called a wire room. And when big news hit, that wire room was like a crescendo. It goes with teletypes, everything just going, paper spinning out of the machines. The Pope had been shot. Jennings looked at me and says, you want to go to Rome? I'm flying there tonight. You can come with me. And I jumped on a private jet with Peter Jennings and his producer. I had like $50 in my pocket and a burnt up credit card. And he checked me into the Cavalieri Hilton on his credit card, ABC's credit card. And it was one of the nicest hotels in Rome. And all of a sudden I'm like, double holy shit, and stuff like that could happen. It was very freewheeling. So fast forward to now, I would find joy and exuberance, I think, all over again, in the sense that I don't have to wait for lightning to strike. I don't have to wait for an editor to come to me for a photograph. I can publish now. I've got the tools. I can go immediate. I shoot a picture right here in Bucharest. You can see it wherever you are. Like Ted is in San Francisco. He literally can see it in less than a minute. Wow. The first time I ever covered an Olympics in 1984, I was on a crane overhead at the God's eye position for the opening of the Olympics. And the cameraman's next to me spinning away his video. And I was thinking, like, I'm shooting Kodachrome up here. And it's going to take a day or two to process it, to even look at it. And the entire world is seeing what he's seeing right now through his camera. And I thought, something's got to change eventually. And it has. As still photographers, we're very potent now. We're very immediate. So I would find, I hope, joy and wonder and the enabling of the growth, your growth as a photographer now in situ in this digital world that we live in. I would hope for that. I don't think I would be, I don't think I would be angry about it. I think I would try to throw myself into it. Is it harder for photographers now, young photographers? Yes. The ability to shoot is there. The ability to transmit's there. The ability to monetize what you're doing is the tough corner to turn. This is turning out to be a very inspirational hour.
No, this is excellent. Thank you.
Chime in, Joe, to take you right down. There you go, folks. Were you feeling good before you turned in? Well, Joe's going to change that. Hello there.
If you like these stories, we have a special deal we're offering on the real deal that I'll tell you about a little later, which is actually true. I wonder if you wouldn't mind ticking through, because you had talked about your imagination as the cow in the kitchen. And I wonder if you could maybe get to that story, and maybe while you're doing that in the PDF, if you have it there, the reason I bring it up is because you talked a little bit about imagination earlier. And in that story in particular, if I'm remembering correctly, the other side of the coin of imagination is risk and is failure, or potentially failure. And so I wonder, one of the questions here is, can you share a story of a time things went a little off kilter in a humorous or sad way on a shoot or assignment? And it just made me think of this particular story because I believe this does lead into the Sports Illustrated coverage that you discuss in the book.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, things do go off the rails. Photography is not a certain endeavor on any level. And certainly success is, it's not a lock when you go out into the world. In fact, Jay Maisel, being a very famous photographer, and he's retired now. He's an older gentleman now, but he was a mentor to many of us coming up. Very smart guy, very smart. He used to charge more for his stock photography, from what I know, than sometimes his assignments, because his theory, people would say, "Oh, like, what are you charging me all this money for? It's just a stock photograph." And Jay's response to that was, "Yeah, but it's real. It exists. There's a certainty to it. You put me on assignment, there's no certainty that I'm going to deliver absolutely what you need. But here, this photograph, part of my stock library, you can have it. It's there. There's a great deal of assuredness that you will gain from buying this photograph and the usage thereof from me." So his theory was like, you have to pay more for a sure thing,
Mm-hmm.
So yes, certainty in photography is scarce. So yeah, there's a little background on the cow and her alarmed nature when flashes were going off, et cetera. But then I kind of migrate into the idea of imagination and trying to, well, let me put it this way. You can imagine your way right into a disaster. Things can go wrong. And what seemed like a good idea in the studio, when you trot it out into the world, sometimes it ain't the easiest throw. You know what I'm saying? So Sports Illustrated assigned me to do a job on the biggest guys in the NFL, which are generally speaking the offensive linemen. They start 290s, 300 and up. And so yeah, I thought, fantastic, this is going to be amazing. And it simply wasn't. I had this idea, like I had these guys, bought, I think this was the Indianapolis Colts at the time, and then holding up a cheerleader in a cornfield. Oh my God, some of the stuff was just god awful. I put these fellas, I think, are these the Saints or the Pittsburgh Steelers? I can't even remember. But let me get back to something that's reasonable here in terms of my screen. I keep zooming around here, but there we go. That's okay. And yeah, it just didn't work. And there's a whole other series here. I brought 2 Kansas City Chiefs out to a way station on the highway. I thought, oh, hey, yeah, long story short, my editor at Sports Illustrated was not impressed. And the story never ran. And I realized during the course of it, like, it's really hard to show how big someone is. Big relative to what? Big next to an average person, big next to a small kid. I had this kid that's Joe Jacoby. I can't remember the other fellow's name, but from the Washington Redskins, enormous people. Nate Newton, 330 pounds, going off a diving board. Convinced him to jump off the board for me in Dallas. Oh my God. And yeah, it just didn't turn the corner. I took Jackie Jordan Kersey and I wrapped her in unjacketed fiber optic cable. Thankfully, I'd worked with Jackie before, so she was patient with me, but holy smoke. Also, not a particularly great idea. Cumbersome, in a word. That's an earlier picture I had made of Jackie, which was simple, black and white, and beautiful. So when you layer unnecessary complications onto the simple act of photography, I mean, photography is really kind of designed to be simple. Mayhem can ensue, and so can bad pictures. And I've had both sides of the block, to be sure, in my career. Things where imagination led me to a wonderful image, and other times where imagination just sputtered and died. And that's kind of ugly, actually, when Sports Illustrated sends you out for 2 weeks and spends that kind of dough and you don't deliver, they're not happy. They aren't.
I can imagine. Now, in that, somewhat, I guess, related to imagination is, in whether it's succeeding or not so successful, you're still pursuing something in your imagination to try to find some expression or storytelling. Have you ever, I believe that there's a question in here somewhere that kind of relates to creative drought. Have you ever gone through a period where that imagination just wasn't even there? Have you had spells of challenges in terms of creativity and ideas, and what have you done about that?
Sure. I used to teach every year at the Eddie Adams workshop, which was a very noteworthy workshop back in the day. In fact, I taught there for 14 years as a team leader. There were 10 team leaders, and we had teams of 10 photographers that we tried to guide through a shooting experience on the weekends. And one of the mandates as a team leader was, at the opening night, you had to get up and show 5 pictures that represented you. And I always tried to keep it current. And I would, year to year, I would try to find 5 pictures that I would be happy with, that I could show that I had shot that year. That was kind of my rule in my head. I wasn't going to show old work. I wanted to make sure I was continuing to go forward. And there were years that I stood at that podium and showed 5 images, and I wasn't happy. I mean, I was having difficulty finding 5 images that I was happy with from an entire year. And that, generally speaking, is not a good year, So yes, there are dry spells, there are valleys, far more valleys actually than there are peaks, I think, in this industry. The peaks are so sustaining, though, they really can carry you through. But I've got no brilliant solutions, like, go to therapy, or, go to a mountaintop in Nepal and sit cross-legged with a guru, and, and all of that. I mean, all fine notions that might work for people. My cure for it, if there is such a term that is applicable here, is to just keep working. Put my head down and keep working and grind it out, and you'll eventually find your way. Don't put the camera down. Don't lament. Don't get down on yourself. Don't walk into the bathroom mirror in the morning and put a big, L on your forehead, like, I'm such a loser, man. Oh my God. Don't do that to yourself, because this is a field that is actually replete with failure. And failure is a constant companion. So keep shooting, even if you're not happy with yourself, even if you're not perceived to be doing well, keep shooting, keep your eye on the camera, and you'll work your way out of it. It can be kind of grimy, and I don't know, it might be that I'm just a simpleton in many ways. Like, maybe I've purposely not over-examined my motivations to be a photographer or the reasons I shoot the pictures that I shoot, because I just don't want to break anything. It is what it is. It's the old Popeye philosophy, at a certain point you have to accept the fact that, I am what I am, and it's the way I see, and it's who I am, and it's an amalgam of emotions and history and my childhood and my influences and the films I've seen, the artists I've admired, the literature I've read. Everything is a big swirl, physically, mentally, emotionally. It is your jigsaw puzzle that is you. And the mosaic of any photographer is lots and lots of various colored pieces, and that is just it, so I don't know how to do anything else. So when I hit a wall, I just push harder.
Good answer. Thank you. Just keep going. Just keep going.
Let's keep going.
I actually had a question for you related to writing and photography, but I might hold on that question. But the initial phrase that prompted the question I'm thinking of that phrase now as you're talking about this. And early in the book, I believe it's even in the before the book begins proper, you talk about how you were hinting at the difficulty of getting to the writing of the book itself. And you were roaming the earth with other assignment work, but promised, quote, to someday come to the keyboard with stamina and intent. And it just makes me think of, stamina and intent are, you brought that to the writing, but I imagine that those are two crucial, words or topics or ideas that you bring to the photographic work you've done over the last 40 plus years. And, stamina and intent feel to me like drive and passion. And it's just kind of, from the outside, it feels like it's always there for you, that you have this limitless energy that you bring to this work. And so maybe that's part of it for you, is, just keeping going.
Yeah, I think that's quite true in lots of ways. Stamina is a oft overlooked component of success in this business, because it is debilitating on lots of ways. It can be exhausting mentally, emotionally, and physically. It can be demanding in terms of your ability to stay calm in the face of financial difficulties, and the uncertainty I alluded to earlier in the conversation. There is a certain level of just, again, emotional, physical, mental stamina to just keep doing this, because A, you love it, B, it's necessary because it's how you make a living. And I guess there could be any number of reasons, fear of failure, the necessity that a lot of photographers have, that some point in time, a picture they might make might be deemed relevant or important. A picture that they make might have the capacity for memory. Now, I kind of play a game. There's a chapter in the book called On Being Iconic. And I play a game with the reader about, I describe pictures verbally that immediately everyone will know. Young girl running down the road, horribly burned from napalm in Vietnam. Migrant mother, pictures, W. Eugene Smith, Minamata. I mean, historically iconic photographs that are part of our historical record that we have in our head. You don't need to see the picture. A verbal description is plenty. You have the picture in your head. And then I ask, and then an attractive person standing on the rocks in the surf with a flash in a softbox to camera left and a TTL flash with a gel on it lighting the person's hair, and I say, well, having trouble with that one, right? Why? Because you've seen 50,000 of them, and I admit I've shot a bunch of them myself for lighting examples or just to have a beautiful photograph or a favor for a friend or an assignment to photograph a model or any of those things. All valid, all wonderful, but they're not memorable. So that is a plateau that I think all photographers aspire to, is to shoot something that might be deemed memorable. And that is part of the fuel for the fire as well. At the end of all things, you don't want your archive to be akin to a rock that somebody throws down a deep, dark well, that there's a distant splash and then you never hear from that archive again. And so, yeah, there's a power to this that it has over you, and that, I don't mean that in a bad sense. It's not like some sort of evil spell. It's not. It's very wonderfully rewarding. It's welcome, that hunger, that angst, is absolutely necessary. William Albert Allard, who's a formidable photographer, historically important at National Geographic, he always says, you cannot be indifferent and do significant work. And when you care about something, that automatically means that, you have to care about this. And when you care about something, that opens up a whole theater full of emotions, because if you care about something desperately and you fail, that's heartbreaking. If you care about something and succeed, that is, just a sublime feeling of reward. It's like a shower on a tropical beach. You went through the muck and the grime and you sustained and you drove it forward and you went through a ton of grief and you got this photograph, and now you're allowed this relief, this sense of relief, however momentary, because tomorrow you got to go out with a camera again and there's another client who is like, what have you done for me lately? So it's a it's a problem. It's just a goddamn problem, and it ain't ever going away, and it's always there sitting on your doorstep. It's like, you walk out on your front porch and it's like some dog from down the block just comes up to your front lawn and takes a shit on it. It's like it's like I was just starting to feel good.
Yep, but yesterday was so good.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so let me ask you if this is okay. We're hitting the hour mark. What I'd like to do is ask you one more question that might have a longer answer, and then while you're answering that question, I'm in the chat. I'm gonna let everybody know that at rockynook.com you can look for The Real Deal. I've got a link I'll put in the chat, but you can just search The Real Deal at rockynook.com. And when you're checking out, if you choose to purchase the book, you could use the coupon code JOE40, JOE40, JOE40 for 40% off. I'll put that information into the webinar chat. And then maybe after that one question, we could do perhaps a quick little lightning round of a few questions that I think have pretty short answers, and then maybe we'll call it at that point. Does that sound all right?
Sounds fine to me.
So this might turn us towards something a little brighter. This question.
Has this webinar been kind of dark, Ted? Is it?
No, it's been real. You've kept it very real, Joe. It has actually felt. It's felt a lot like the book. but with but the book has, I would say, more of a spectrum of successes rather than maybe leaning into some of these challenges. But I feel like maybe that's the kind of stuff that really sticks with you, right? So
all the powers that be at Rocky Nook are going to be calling you up, Ted, like, Ted, you did this webinar with Joe, and the book sales literally fell off a shelf. I mean, what did you guys do out there?
How are they negative? How is that possible? All right, so Emily in New York City says, in The Real Deal, you talk about randomness quite a bit, and randomness in a good way, which I think of as related to serendipity, often related to serendipity. At the same time, I imagine that on a shoot, you need to prepare for everything down to the smallest detail. So how do you balance meticulous preparation and execution with an openness to serendipity and randomness?
Good question, perceptive question. Yes, you do travel, with, I have historically traveled with lots and lots of stuff. And a lot of that stuff is predicated on a measure of redundancy. We're not going out there with just 1 or 2 batteries. We're going out there with 5 batteries. We're going out there with backup flash and a backup camera, backup lenses, and all of that predicated on that great, what if in the sky, if things go wrong, if, the luggage gets lost, predicates on, what do you take on the airplane with you, so that if all of your luggage disappears, at least you have enough stuff that's with you physically and your person that you can actually still go forward and shoot something. All those things are in preparation for the potential, disaster or things to go wrong, and so it does make us as photographers very, very meticulous in the way we might plan things out. And some jobs do have a very definitive roadmap. The client will drive it forward in a very orchestrated fashion, and you have to, they're paying the freight, so you have to do what they ask you to do. But the idea of serendipity, happenstance, is a powerful one. And I have, not routinely, but I have on many, many more times than just one, have just chucked aside all of my previous thinking and the amount of gear that I brought with me, whatever it is, and it's come down to one camera, one lens, and a moment. And that moment has to be observed. You have to be sensitive to it. One of the big fears I always have about the way I conduct myself in the field is that I'm Bigfoot. I'm just tramping ahead and I'm crushing the flowers I should be admiring, or roses that I should be smelling, or a view down the valley that I should be looking at, because I ignore those things because I'm dead set on getting to this objective I had in my head back in the planning stages of the job. So I pray for the ability to let all that go and just roll with the punch. And that again lends itself back, or maybe full circle back, to the idea of uncertainty we talked about a little bit earlier, that as a photographer you have to be careful or comfortable with uncertainty. I always imagine it being, and I've literally done this when I've been on assignment, extended assignment for the National Geographic, is literally you get on the boat having no idea where that boat's going. In other words, your life becomes secondary, your schedule becomes secondary, all your planning becomes secondary. You realize that the deal is, I got to jump on this thing and I got to roll with it, because, my imaginations about this job are proving to not be valid. So it is a very fine line, a balance, if you will, that your instincts have to drive it. And that means that you can't be dogmatic. People ask me sometimes in this field, they say, well, Joe, do you always use this? Or do you always do this? And my reply, and I'm not being facetious, is I don't always do anything photographically. I become what the job needs me to become. I roll with the punch, and I do what I have to do. And it's not an always situation. It just never is. Mm-hmm. And hopefully I'm observant enough and sensitive enough to know that a moment that might be spontaneously presenting itself out there is far more important oftentimes than any imagining I might have done about the job.
Makes good sense. Thank you.
It's hard. You have to abandon a lot of preconceived thinking, at the same time acknowledging the fact that pre-visualization is a very powerful and necessary thing.
Indeed. Thank you.
It's a field rife with contradictions, Ted. What I'm saying here.
Okay, so listen, for these last few questions, we'll just go quickly. Is that all right? And maybe
totally fine.
Would you, quickly, Joe, would you mind maybe stopping sharing, and we can have your beautiful face?
Sure, happy to do that.
Front and center.
There we go.
Perfect, thanks. So here's just a few quick questions, which I think are pretty interesting and may offer some, may get some interesting responses, I guess. What is your everyday motivation?
Apart from survival, economically, to keep working, my motivation is I still love being a photographer. I'm still in love with the sound of the shutter. I still know it's what I'm cut out to do. And I don't think at this point in my life I would be a successful, restaurateur or I don't know, whatever else I might think about being. This is the path that's laid out for me, and I'm motivated by that because I still desperately want to succeed at it.
If you could photograph anyone who you haven't yet photographed, do you have an answer for that? Who would that be? Is there somebody at the absolute top of your list?
Whew. That's a really, really good question. There's a couple of folks, over the course of time I've perceived to be, I don't want to be overwhelmingly political here, but I would have loved to have photographed Obama when he was in office, because I felt, he's a very watershed, moment in our presidency, in a good way. And, in terms of sheer kind of, I've always had this kind of background notion about faces, the faces that you see. I love human beings and their faces, and so you look at somebody like an Ed Harris, who's an amazing actor, and that chiseled face. You look at somebody like Cate Blanchett, you look at, these faces are designed to be up on the screen for a reason. And, I think about, that would be cool. I've shot fashion sort of inadvertently over the years, and I actually shoot it pretty well. And, a potential dream would be to shoot the cover of Vogue. I've shot covers of, Time, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, Geographic, Life, never shot the cover of a fashion magazine. That'd be kind of fun.
I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyway, because I think it's a fun question. Shooting with film is having a comeback among both young and more mature photographers. You were talking earlier about Kodachrome 64. You can remember exactly the film stock you're using 40 years ago. Do you have any nostalgia for the film look or for shooting with film in any way?
Zero. Emotionally, sure. I hark back to Kodachrome and think, oh man, I've got all these Kodachromes down in my file cabinets. I shot Kodachrome for Geographic. Wow. Started shooting for Geographic in the late 80s. So yeah, so I shot for 15, 18 years. Kodachrome after Kodachrome after Kodachrome, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful film, and it was a staple for sure. And it was utterly like a professional standard, if you will, very exacting. in terms of the way it demanded the approach to exposing Kodachrome, very little latitude. But given the wonders of digital, the amazing aspects of digital resolution, digital immediacy, and the ability to shape an image thereafter, that's great stuff. And I wouldn't give that up, at all.
Figured something like that. If you set out to learn another skill in addition to being a photographer, what would it be? Is there anything, either maybe to supplement, that's the question, but perhaps either to supplement your photography or something totally different?
Wow, yeah, that is a good question. I mean, here we are talking about a book that I wrote, and I'd say I'd love to be a writer. And you could say, well, Joe, you are a writer. You've got several books. But to me, the writing springs from the photography. So I'd love to conceive a novel, perhaps, and write something just completely unrelated to photography that's just out of my head, out of my imagination. And that imagination is a teeming tar pit of bubbling ideas that have sunk to the bottom of the tar pit and are living down there with the bones of the mastodons and the Tyrannosaurus rexes from many thousands of millennia ago. So maybe it'd be fun to go fishing in there and see if I could drag one of them to the surface.
That's maybe a great way to end it. I did want to talk to you quite a bit about considering that this is celebrating the real deal and your writing. I did want to talk a little bit about writing and photography, but maybe we'll just call it there. And so again, we have The Real Deal here by Joe McNally. If you go to rockynook.com and use the code Joe40, you get 40% off. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to, I was looking through some online reviews of the book, and I had two sentences I wanted to share from readers who have already purchased the book and read it. And one person says, "Nobody can put this thing we call photography into perspective quite like Joe McNally." And the other quote from a review is, "This is a book on a different level, a book from the heart, a photographic autobiography of a life of ups and downs, of hits and misses, but most importantly, a life of dedication and purpose." I know I'm biased, but I think it's a fantastic book. And thanks, Joe.
Well,
what's that?
Much credit goes to you, Ted. There hasn't been any questions really directed to Ted during the course of this as the editor, but the role of an editor is to partner the writer in a positive and productive way. In addition to the fact that Ted and I are really, really close friends, and we share a penchant for really, really horribly bad, unfunny jokes, which we trade on a regular basis. Apart from that, just putting, the professional hat on, he's a terrific editor. And what you need, sometimes as a writer, as a photographer, whatever, you are ranting and raving, and you're shooting off these unformed ideas. And it's up to the editor to shape it. And Ted's brilliant at that. So, tip of the hat back to you.
Thank you. I do not accept. Well, it's easy to work with you and your writing, which is fantastic. But thank you for those kind words. Anything else you wanna say to everybody before we head out?
Well, just thank you. Thank you for spending a little time. I appreciate it very much. Life is busy, so for you to drop out of that and chime in here is a lovely and wonderful thing, and I appreciate it very much. And Christmas is coming. Buy the book. You have friends. Everybody has photographer friends.
It's not quite a stocking stuffer, but it is a fantastic gift. That's absolutely for sure. So thanks to all attendees who attended today, and we appreciate it. And thanks very much to you, Joe. I really appreciate the time you took. It's getting quite late there, I imagine, out in Bucharest. And have a good rest of your trip and a successful set of assignment work.
Thanks very much. Yep, I'll heading north into Transylvania tomorrow. So
Oh boy.
it'll be fun.
Well, good luck.
All right.
All right.
Take
Thanks
care.
very much.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Rocky Nook. And thank you, everyone who chimed in.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.